Testing 1, 2, 3.
Lawrence.
Lawrence, are we ready? Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Todd Taraz, and I'm the founder and executive director of the AI.LA community. Raise of hands. Is this their first time going to an AI.LA event? Please raise your hand. All right, all right. All right, who's been to an AI.LA event before? All right, awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for showing up. It's been a really interesting day. It's crazy. Earlier today, I was with a friend of ours, John Allen Stevens, and we were teaching kids over in Boyle Heights how to use ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 so they could create lyrics to their rap song, create the title to their song, and also create album artwork. So basically, they use ChatGPT to create the lyrics. They then synthesize it using UberDuck. So like some kids were using like Snoop Dogg's voice, and then they created art with Dolly. It was pretty freaking amazing. And it seriously was just down the street. It was on the other side of this bridge. And then tonight, of course, we get to talk about ChatGPT and large language models with all of you amazing adults. And so it's pretty, I don't know, it was not planned. It just somehow all worked out. So today's been a pretty beautiful day. So anyways, AI.LA, right? This event would not have been possible, like, it's ridiculous the team behind this. Obviously, look at like, how many people we have here. Obviously, it's 275 people because that's the occupancy limits for the building. But yeah, it's exactly 275 here, guys. But anyways, Ethan here and I, he'll come up in a second, it's from Product Management, Product Managers Los Angeles, so Product Managers Association Los Angeles. We were always talking about how could we collaborate and do an event, and this is the event that we decided to do. And if you remembered, probably if you were early on trying to register, we originally were going to do this on Abbott Kinney with our amazing host, AE Studio, and then we realized we need a bigger venue. So we started shopping around, trying to find something, and we finally, I think this was our third location that really could actually hold enough people for this amazing topic. And so really, please just give a round of applause to all of our sponsors and partners, AE Studio, ViceCity, Honey, and PMA.LA. And so actually, great time for Ethan to come on up and say a few words.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for coming out. This is a super exciting evening. I'm Ethan Cole. I'm the president of the Product Managers Association Los Angeles. Also host of the Product.LA podcast, available on Spotify, Apple, all those good things. Check us out. We're highlighting the amazing things that the people behind the technology are doing in Los Angeles. And it really is all about the community. So thank you all for coming tonight. PMA has been around since 2012. We have over 3,000 members from 500 companies. We are LA's largest community of product and design people, and we love interacting and collaborating with just everyone involved in delivering and executing and building good technology. So thank you everyone tonight who's not a member of PMA.LA. To learn more about PMA, go to PMA.LA. We do a number of things. So one, we put on events like this evening, and Nav and Kedar are going to speak to us about some of our upcoming events. But we also have a mentorship program, which is really important to us, similar to what Todd is doing. We connect working product managers with students from underrepresented groups to help build a better and more diverse next gen. So learn more about that, go to pma.la/mentorship. Again, we want to thank our hosts, PayPal for having us tonight, Studio AE for hosting this night's event. To all of our speakers, thank you guys for being here. This is an amazing crowd. This is easily the biggest event in 4 years that I've been a part of and I've seen in LA. So thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you all for speaking. Also like to thank our sponsors from PMA. So we have Pragmatic Institute, as well as Uruit. And we actually have the CEO from Uruit here tonight, Margarita Mangino, here from Uruguay. Yeah, give her a hand. She's here from Uruguay. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with her in this trip, and she's amazingly knowledgeable and insightful. So if you're looking for ways to help augment your teams to actually complete the items in your 2023 roadmap, they have full stack software developers, product people, designers. Check out Margarita. Go speak to her later. They help complete roadmaps. That's what they do. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce and thank Nav and Kedar, and they're going to talk to us about the PMA meetups that are upcoming and a little bit more about the team.
Hello, everybody. Are you guys excited? Woo! Awesome. So my name is Navjo. I'm also with PMA.LA, Product Manager Association of Los Angeles, on the leadership team, really coordinating events and meetups. So really excited about this event in partnership with AI.LA and also Product Hang that Travis runs. Where's Travis? Oh, there he is. So it's a three-way partnership, and then thank you to all the sponsors. We have a lot of great upcoming events. Our next event is going to be on March 23rd, actually down the street at Truly LA. We're going to do a happy hour. We're going to do a lot of happy hours and a lot of partnership events with other great organizations around LA, like LA CTO Forum and also Tech for Good in LA, and then also other product and design meetups. So it's a lot more coming up. Also, I have a secondary announcement. How many people here in the crowd, raise your hand if you're working on any... I'll wait for that. That is not the announcement. We have an AI. All right, I'm gonna keep going. How many people here are working on a startup or project related to large language models or ChatGPT? Raise your hand. Woo! That's why we're here. That's why we're here to interact, talk best practices. I myself have worked on a lot of startups in the past, a lot around data and chatbot and AI as well. And we're excited to announce a new project, a startup that we're working on. How many folks in here have worked in Salesforce before? Awesome, a lot of you. So we get it. We understand that Salesforce can be clunky. There's a lot of data there. And so we've interviewed countless users of Salesforce, account reps, and we understand it can take several hours to pretty much scour your Salesforce data, Gong data, and other sources to really understand what you're looking for. And so today we are launching Insight Genie. Imagine having the ability to pretty much have all your Salesforce data, Gong data, and other sources at your fingertips when you need it, so sales reps can easily access and communicate with their customers. We're launching our beta very soon. We have a website at insightgenie.co. Here with my partners Nick and Harshal. Nick back there, Harshal right here. If you're interested in talking about our beta, please come find us. Thank you for the time. I'm going to pass it to Kedar for some final announcements.
Thank you, Nav. That's really exciting. Insight Genie sounds like a great product. Just a quick introduction to myself. So I'm Kedar. I'm a recent grad from UCLA, actually. And I was actually part of the the PMA mentorship program as a student just, a year ago. And now I'm part of the meetup team, got involved to throw on events like this, and it's a great, great privilege and honor just being here again. And I know it's been said before, definitely wanted to thank all our sponsors and all our partners here today. Specifically, this venue is something that we wouldn't be able to support this many people without our friends at PayPal and Honey. So Stephanie, Alex, Teresha, Anna, Brian, Miguel, everyone that's been involved. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. Since we talk about AI, we're talking about a lot of things. Another thing that's really been happening is the economy. The economy is changing. The economy is the tech market right now is crazy. Just a show of hands, who's looking for the next opportunity? This is a great. You're going to hear from some amazing speakers today. You're going to hear from meet amazing people in tech, and us at PMA.LA and AI.LA and all the organizations here, we're trying to connect communities, connect people together. So definitely try and make the most of it, and we're so happy that you could be here today. Thank you. And I'll pass it off to Todd to introduce the first speaker.
Is that you? Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. All right, next up is our other amazing sponsor, Javon. I always mess it up. Javon. I don't know what it is. Anyway, AE Studios. So everyone responsible for the tacos and the amazing drinks here, give it up for Javon. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. I don't know how you guys do that without notes, by the way, so let me see here. Hi, I'm Jevin. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thanks, Todd, for being Todd and never pronouncing my name correctly. And thanks for AI.LA in general, and for wrangling all of us together. This is super exciting, really, really great. So we are AE Studio. We're based in Venice, home of the hailstorms, at least as of today. We're a team of developers, designers, and data scientists who I think build some of the coolest shit in the world. Yeah. One of our own data scientists is right there. That's why I'm looking in the corner, by the way. Thanks, Dev. So we have a consulting arm, so building AI and a range of other products for startups and enterprise. We have a skunkworks group where we build and scale businesses internally, and a brain-computer interface division working to, I don't know how to say this humbly, develop the future of thought and save humanity. Not mic drop yet. We just returned actually from to LA from DC, where we were in the bowels of the Herbert Hoover building, which sounds weird. We were asked as advisors on emerging tech and leaders in the BCI space to attend a series of meetings with the Department of Commerce in DC, which was really, really exciting and cool. The conversation, as one would expect, many times turned to AI. I'm here to report the government has no idea what's going on. Shocking, I say. So I'm thankful that we all know what's happening, right? All right, can I get a show of hands? Okay. At least we will by the end of the night. That's why we're here. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the food and drink, which we paid for. And yes, I wrote this entirely on my own with the help of AE's very own bot, Chat Ev Coopersmith. Thank you.
And last but not least, Lawrence from ViceCity Ventures, who's helping us with digital graphics and our live streaming recording.
How's everybody doing? I see a lot of familiar faces from our generative AI. Who is there? Oh, okay, show of hands. I remember you guys. Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you, Todd, and everybody else for this amazing thing. Obviously, ChatGPT, LLMs, and all of the other crazy things of AI are changing the landscape of what we understand. In just a short period of time, everybody in this room, show of hands, who's used ChatGPT in just the last week? Keep those hands up. There we go, baby. So what we do at ViceCity Ventures is we look for amazing startups that are utilizing AI. We both do investment and equity trade in terms of development. We have a team of AI trainers, designers, marketers. We work with some of the largest companies like Verizon, Ace Hardware, Dippin' Dots, anybody like ice cream here, to create them awesome, not just chatbots, but also understanding data. We're even now training AI where over 50% of our code is written with AI, fine-tuned to our model, making sure everything is validated and sanitized. If you are looking for the next opportunity, hit me up. And with that, let's pass it to our guests. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. All right, everybody, now the time you've been waiting for. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So the setup tonight is 4 talks. You're going to see presentations for 10 minutes each. Then we're going to go into an amazing Q&A panel discussion with Shira as our wonderful host and so moderator. And so, Travis, please, the stage is yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. How are you? Good? I can't believe you all decided to actually come at rain today. You guys are saints. You deserve a merit badge for sure for that. So my name is Travis, and this is going to be the most interesting talk I've ever done because thanks to PayPal, they've got a great space, but their IT department is incredibly diligent. And so I was unable to log into this machine for ChatGPT, so that sort of messes up my demo. And also, they don't let me log on to the internet with my machine, and so that messes up my interactive part about the demo. So this is going to be probably a shittier version of all of those like carousel things you guys see about ChatGPT in your LinkedIn news feeds. So I apologize. You could have just probably sat on the live stream. That being said, we have memes. It's going to be great. And certainly the great thing for all of you is I'm not the only one who's talking tonight, so this is going to be great. By raise of hands, everyone, okay, audience participation, because it's a great way to start out a chat. Who's used ChatGPT this week? Great. Keep your hand up if you have gold.
All right. Great. Okay, that's helpful. How long? Raise your hand if you've been using ChatGPT for 1 week. Like, okay, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Okay, 4 weeks. Who used it the first week it was out? Why are there more hands than the people who raised for 1 week? Okay. All right. This is an interesting crowd. Okay. Okay, awesome. That's helpful. Who knows what a large language model is? Okay, great. Who knows how neural networks work at all? Okay, about half of us. Okay, great. Who here is terrified that their job is going to disappear in the next 5 years? It's like 3 people. Awesome. The Venn diagram of people not worried about AI taking their jobs and the Venn diagram of people who will drive from wherever across LA in rain is probably really, really high. So that's really interesting. Okay. So about me, I'm a fractional head of product for early stage startups specializing in AI. I started dabbling in AI in general in 2015. I worked at a fitness company many of you may have heard of called Beachbody. We sold P90X T25. So I was part of the original team of 6 that helped them go from physical media, DVDs, to streaming. And then I had dual roles in product management and research and development, where we worked on pose detection and biometric feedback for interactive fitness. Effectively, I just tried to copy what Peloton was doing. So after I left and went on a journey of self-discovery, I worked on stuff in vision and generative. Vision, I tried to do stuff that Beachbody wouldn't let me do, and then I realized that I didn't have enough money for that. And then I worked on some stuff because as a PM, I got really tired of writing wireframes, taking a photo, and then emailing them to myself, and then pulling up that photo, and then opening Figma, and then just recreating what I drew on a whiteboard. I figured I bet an AI could probably do better than that. And a couple years later, that launched yesterday from somebody else. So that's great. No, I didn't launch that. No, that's a boob thing. Okay, and then in the pandemic, like everybody else, people baked bread. I taught an AI to paint like Bob Ross. And then NFTs took off, and I became a Web3 artist accidentally. So Happy Little Pixels PX, if you want to check it out, Instagram and Twitter, that's me. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is OpenAI for those of you who kind of have maybe used the product but don't know the company or what's going on underneath the hood. We'll talk a little bit about how to use it. You guys have been using it, so we'll talk a little bit more about how to use it better. And then we'll see how the show and tell goes. We're all on this journey together. Okay, so large language models. A lot of data, most of the open web, and a bunch of stuff that is fed into a bunch of different tasks based on what is submitted. And those are called parameters. For those of you who are glossing over, it effectively is just everything that you hated about statistics and everything you hated about calculus wrapped into one, and then everything you hated about English class thrown on top. So that's how these things work. Sarah has been working on this. She worked at Google Brain. It's gonna be better. Input is effectively text to text. You put in some text and it gives you some more. But really what's happening underneath the scenes, just so you understand, and this is a little bit of framing for the rest of the conversation this evening, is that these are these things called tokens. And no, it's not Chuck E. Cheese, it's just 4 character strings. And so there's something that slices up whatever you put into it, and then it looks at the monstrosity of the internet it was trained on, and then it just tries to guess what the next right token's gonna be. And by the way, these screenshots are from OpenAI's documentation, so that's how it works. It's just literally guessing the next 4 characters every time. Now, what's amazing about this, and Sarah's gonna talk about this a little bit later, is we've been trying to solve this problem for a long time. The reason why it feels like magic now is that the amount of things that a large language model can keep sort of in its working memory has expanded a bit to feel like it's more human-like, but effectively under the hood, that's what's happening. And so a lot of the things I'm sure as you guys have seen, A lot of basic tasks that you can sort of remix. These are effectively the primitives of ChatGPT, I think, from a user's perspective. Ask it to explain stuff, brainstorm things for you, ask it to tell you a story, or generate prompts. Actually, that's kind of my new thing, is using it to generate prompts that I use for other things. That's called prompt pipelining, and you're gonna hear a lot more about that, I'm sure, later. The other thing is, and this is a big thing also from the documentation, is that when you're feeding a prompt into something and you're not really getting what you want out of it, it's really helpful to give it some examples. And if you give it some examples, again, OpenAI's documentation says it helps calibrate just enough, and that's called prompt fine-tuning, and I literally just made that word up, so that's it's hot off the presses for you guys. No NFTs on that one, sorry. So that is effectively, in a nutshell, how it works, and how to use it. I'm going to see how much of this I can sort of show you live, and we'll see how it goes, because I'm going to be tethered to my phone. If I can get this microphone in. Can you still hear me? Okay. Is it gonna work? It may not work. Might work again. Plug it back in. Is there an IT person here that can explain to me what I'm doing wrong in a very condescending way? No. Typical IT, they're never around when you need them. I probably didn't submit the IT help ticket properly. Oh, something's happening. I did that like 6 times, dude. Plug it out. You know, I'm a product manager, I'm not stupid.
Let me see what happens.
I'm sorry.
There we go. Magic.
Oh, hooray. Hey. Let's try this. Okay, great. The tether's off, so let's see what the network, let's see if the demo gods smile upon me. Okay, so if the interactive doesn't work, hopefully we can step through some of the stuff that I was trying to do for yesterday when I was prompting. Oh my God, how the hell? Let's try this again. Hooray, okay, cool. So as I said, sort of as the lead off, giving it some explanations, or some examples. So this is where I requested, so one thing that it can do is actually generate outputs for you that are highly structured based on just a really generalized broad input. So a lot of things that I do as a PM is I need to create diagrams because pictures, and so typing that stuff, like usually the synapses in my brain happen immediately and it takes me 40 minutes to convert that into motor things in my fingers to write the syntax that then gets rendered as an actual image, right? So I don't want to spend 40 minutes doing that. I just want to say, this is what I want, and then it spits back the code that will sort of render. So I said, hey, great, be a chart generator for me, and then write the markdown that would sort of help me generate this thing. And so what's interesting about this is that when I don't give it some examples, it adds a bunch of like fluffy text into it, right? Because it doesn't quite know exactly what I do want and don't want. And so it keeps trying to be helpful, and I was like, please just don't just give me the markdowns only, please. Don't keep like trying to have a conversation with me or explain it. And he goes, all right, I got you. And I was like, also, change the stuff. He's like, okay, I'll do that again. And then I'm like, oh, great. Now let's go again. Give me the thing. And it still tried to explain, right? So it's like Hermione Granger. It keeps trying to get extra credit. As a contrasting example, this one is a bit cleaner. This is the one from the slide, where I took this, a copy and paste from the documents on Mermaid.js. Mermaid.js is a program where you input this kind of markdown, and then it will create a beautiful picture for you. And so when I gave it some examples, and then I said, tell me when you're ready after it's done, I gave it effectively the same sequences, and it just gave me straight outputs. So it's an example of how adding some examples can really narrow what the output will get to just what you want, and not more than that, and not too different. It goes without saying that, again, it's making up these things 4 characters at a time. And so if you guys try to get it to write something that you're going to try and use as fact, it's not fact. So try that. The other fun stuff that you can do with it, obviously, is actually have conversations with it. So this is something that I picked up where I asked it to act like a drunk person. So this commentary is pretty funny. Okay, so it was really stoked on emojis. I am not sure. Sarah, maybe you could tell me what the training data is that helps with the emoji part. But like, where are you? Is that a bar? Or what song's playing right now? Sweet Caroline. I'm actually not sure if Neil Diamond sings that song. I'm sure it does, but. So you met a guy? I thought you were straight. So which best friend? So then it starts getting really sus on me, and it's like, I don't have a best friend, actually. I'm thinking about somebody else. So then I started getting concerned that they've had too much to drink. So I'm like, you have like 9 best friends. What's going on? And then it's like, oh yeah, I've had so many friends. We're all having a blast together. And I'm like, wait, who are the names of the people you're with? I'm like, do I need to call you an Uber home? So there's a lot. You're alone, aren't you? And this part, actually, I actually laughed out loud alone in my apartment when I said, stop sending me emojis. It's like, I'll tone it down for a bit, and just gave me 1 emoji, but it's... So, last thing, because I'm grotesquely over time, but time's relative, so it doesn't matter. This part's awesome. Okay, so there's a lot of complex tasks that you can sort of chain together to get the responses. And so if you're really specific about the things that you're asking for, you want to start obviously with like, what is the thing that I want you to do? And then you can start getting specifics about the outputs and the content that's in the outputs. So let me step through what the prompt looks like. I need you to generate 5 LinkedIn ads for me based on the descriptors listed below. And then I list the descriptors below. I was like, for each ad, I need you to generate the following: a headline, some body, and a textual description for an image that should be used. So textual, it does not quite understand the word prompt because humans invented that word, and we invented it sometime after the training data ended for this. And so, so a textual description is something that it works really well for. And then it says, and I was like, make sure the copywriting stays within LinkedIn's character limits, and a bunch of other stuff. And so it popped out 5 ads, which are pretty rad. And what you could do is you could take this image text here and go over to OpenAI's other generative AI, which is text to image, which Jeff will talk about in just a second. And you just input that right in, and it will create an image for you that you can use as your ad and just download, right? So something that typically takes a creative marketing team a week to do, it can be done in about 3 minutes. And Coca-Cola, I'm not sure if I saw this, but like in LinkedIn, Coca-Cola mentioned that it is firing most of its agencies of record and is just moving to ChatGPT and DALL-E. So the future's here. All right, so that's it for me. I'm over for time, but I'm going to kick it back over to our host to introduce our next person. And that's it.
You're amazing. Good job. I didn't know you were going to do that. All right. Let's give it up again for Travis. Next up, we've got Jess Solomon, who will be giving an amazing talk on prompt engineering.
We got back up. Ah, it looks good. What's that? Oh, I can use this to change. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I like to use Keynote, so I generated the images from Keynote, and they don't get too pixelated. That's nice. All right. Okay, who am I? The truth is, like, I actually really don't know shit about AI. Like, not much. So there may be a few of you like me in here, but I know a lot of shit about a lot of other stuff, and particularly startups and building companies. And I've built a number of startups. I've sold a number of startups. I founded a fund here in LA called Amplify, which is on its 5th fund. We've done about 250 investments. We've had like 40 exits. So I've been in the startup scene building companies for a long time. And one of the things that an entrepreneur does really well is takes things that other people have done and turns them into something. And so I'm good at that. And so AI is one of those tools for entrepreneurs to build companies. And so I'm very interested in how you guys, the entrepreneurs out here, which I saw hands earlier of people that are building their own companies, how they're taking this tech and what they're creating. And so you can use ChatGPT to make ads. That's one thing. But what else can we do with this tech, just like we've done over the years as entrepreneurs with all kinds of tech? And so that's what's interesting to me, but I'm going to get into that a little bit more. First, I want to talk about the prompt engineering stuff because I find it really fascinating. So I really love the image gen stuff. I use ChatGPT too to write articles. I've actually been using the Notion AI integration now. I just got added like yesterday. It's pretty cool. And so I use that all the time to write content, but I really enjoy making images. And because similarly to being an entrepreneur, I am not an artist, right? I could not draw that image in a million years. But I'm very good at compiling things. That's sort of been my career. My success has been like taking this and taking that and taking that. And so first, I am sorry for those of you that are afraid that your job is going to be taken. And I actually get into a little bit of what I think people that are in that space where they're concerned about losing their job because AI is going to take it over, how possibly you take advantage of it and find a new path for yourself. So I appreciate artists in general, and I'm very sensitive to the concerns that they may have that I can generate this in 30 seconds, and it would take a real digital artist a long time to create, right? So I get that, but I also, am an entrepreneur, and that's what I do. I go around and I try and find ways to leverage what other people have done into something else new that could make money. And so I think that the prompt engineering stuff that you heard a little bit about is really fascinating because of the way you use language to articulate what you're looking for. And so I play around with Midjourney mostly, but I've used all of them. And it's comprised of the keywords, the language modifiers, creative references, parameters, and each model has different parameters. And I'll get into some specifics, but I find it really interesting, and I'll tie this into the entrepreneurial piece, but I just wanted to cover it because I think it's a big part of how we leverage AI, is how we communicate and get the outputs we're looking for, right? Today we have ChatGPT, we have Midjourney. In 6 months from now, we'll have something else. And so how do we communicate with the AI to get the information we're looking for that's in our head? And I think that's a real creative process, and that's why I say the future rock stars of AI are these prompt engineers, just like developers and engineers that are building software have been the rock stars for the last 10, 15 years. They really have in any company. And I think these people that are figuring out how to communicate with AI are a big part of the future here. Okay, so I have some examples of where language comes into play. So here is a image gen of a stamp, right? And that was my first prompt on the left, and I got a pretty cool result. And then I did a much more detailed prompt on the right, and I got a much more interesting looking stamp. Now, I'll talk about this company later, but there's a cool product out there called Prompt Base, which is a place where people buy and sell prompts, and I found it really interesting. I'll show that in a second. That's where I got that prompt from. But you can see, look at the detail of the things that they tested. And what's interesting is the person that wrote this prompt, I didn't write this prompt, wrote many, many, many versions to get what they had in their head, or at least visually what they were looking for. And you can see it makes a difference. Now, I was just talking with Sarah a second ago, and what's interesting is like, this prompt is shitty right here, right? It's not a very good prompt, but the output is still pretty darn good, right? That's a pretty cool looking stamp. Like, it's cool. And what you were saying is that like, they're getting so good that like, you almost don't need to go into the detail. So that's an interesting thing that's sort of happening, but I still find that there's great keywords that get you just a little bit closer to what you're looking for. So that's one example. Second one is the playing card. How many people watch Rick and Morty? Huge Rick and Morty fan. So in this case, the output is not that bad, the first one, right? And it's a small, it said Rick Sanchez, and it knew who that was. In the other case, I combined it with Rick and Morty. So you can see it's actually not that much better. You could argue that that's like, you like that style better than that style, but this is a pretty cool image. So the output was not that different. The next one, a little bit better. So again, a poster in this case, you can see that just has a lot more detail. And if you look into the prompts, you can see some of the words that I'm using. I'm going to get into some of the keywords in a second. But it's really interesting to try different word combinations in different orders, which I'll talk about in a second. The fourth one is Metaverse Marketplace. In this case, it's quite a bit different. So on the left side, it's pretty basic. It's still a great image, like very well designed image, but it's not nearly as detailed as this in terms of the style that I was looking for in this particular example. And I can give anybody that wants this deck later if they want to see the details of the prompt. So here's two interesting resources. There's a ton of prompting resources out there. If you look for like prompt engineering or prompt building or prompt tool or prompt manager, there's tons of tools out there, right? The prompt base is the one I was talking about. I think it's really cool. It's a great example of like kind of a micro SaaS business marketplace where people that write great prompts create the prompt, show the output, you go there, you buy it. It's like $5 for a prompt. So that stamp prompt was $5, right? And they've created an economy around the ability to write better prompts. It's a really cool product. I love it. In fact, I had been thinking about it, and then I stumbled upon it. I was like, damn, I wanted to build that. The other thing is an example of something I just built over the holiday myself, which was I wanted a way to like organize and keep track of my prompts, because like even though I have a decent understanding of the English language, it's minuscule. There's so many words I don't know. And so as I started to browse the Midjourney feed and the other tools to see what people have done, there were so many keywords. I'm like, oh, that's a great keyword. I never thought about that. And it just became too hard for me to remember. And so I was like, I'm just going to build a little tool. And if you saw my profile, like one of my skills is a crappy engineer. Like I can build stuff, but I would never like build a product that a lot of people would use. But I can build this. And you can check it out. It's prompthero.io. There's actually another Prompt Hero, but it's basically just like a CRM for prompts, just a way to organize and find prompts, and it's very useful. There's a ton of great tools out there for prompt building. So in that tool, this is what my homepage looks like in terms of the keywords that I like to use, right? And I sort of broke it down into three things: styles, adjectives. Oh, typo. I checked myself, but different groupings of keywords. And you can see this isn't all the obviously there's a million more keywords, but these are things that I like to use regularly. And I learned all these by just watching other people do stuff on Midjourney. And an inspiration are other artists, right? So like when I particularly like, Studio Ghibli, or I like Van Gogh, or I want that style integrated into my art, I just use one of those keywords. But you can see it's like the size of the potential language that you could use for these models is massive, right? So how do you keep track of all that? How do you organize all that? And I would say this is like a step in the right direction, but it's still overwhelming. So I'm not sure what the solution to that is in the long run. Okay, so one thing about perfecting the prompt. So as much as some of those longer prompts got interesting results, I've actually found, and maybe this is basically what you're saying, Sarah, is that sometimes less is more. So being very specific with certain keywords has produced a better result for me. And all this stuff applies to ChatGPT and all the other tools that we'll see and that you'll use. This is just the example that I'm using because I think the art stuff is really cool. Iteration is like really key, right? So you in the example that you had just done on your drunk guy and the other things, like trying different prompts will get different results. And so it's like, if you really want to find unique outputs, tried many, many different approaches, and that's where the iteration comes in. And you can burn a lot of time. Like, I basically gave up Instagram and Facebook feed at night, and now I just like make images in bed. It's just like, that's like what I do to put myself to sleep. You can actually wait. I don't know, can you do that on ChatGPT? I don't know. But on Midjourney and DALL-E, you can weight the tags. So you can say like, I want it to look like Picasso, but only like 50%. I don't want to weight that so heavily. So you can use weighting in these things. And then the ordering actually matters, right? So if you create a prompt and you put Picasso at the front of the prompt, it's going to give it more heavier weight. You're going to get a certain result that's a little more like that. So just moving your words around will actually give you a different output. Okay, so why even care about this prompting stuff, right? Making images is fun, and like there probably are some businesses that you can do, and you can certainly use it for your marketing, and there are things you can do with the images, but I think the prompting, the thing that's interesting to me is that it's, the AI is becoming ubiquitous across so many areas, and it's going to be so pervasive in so many things we use, right? I just mentioned Notion has the AI built in. It's going to be in all the tools, right? So I think as we continue to get more comfortable as human beings interacting with AI, whatever format that is, it's important that we start understanding how to communicate with it. Maybe one day it'll become like fully sentient, you can just have like a bro conversation, like really, and get the output because they just totally know you, like it'll get there. But right now, like it matters how you talk to it. And so I think that is an important just overarching thing as we evolve over the next 3, 5, 7 years. How do you start, communicating these to get with these programs to get the result? And then the other thing that I think I find interesting is like I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she has basically 8 words in her vocabulary, right? She's got like, yeah, huh, bro. Like she's literally, everything she says is like one of those 8 words. And so I feel like human-to-human communication has kind of broken down in a lot of ways, right? We don't really talk to each other, right? And I think, obviously, if you're in a relationship or you've ever been in a relationship, like communication's essential. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to like let AI sort of help us be better at communicating, because we're going to have to communicate better with AI to get the result. I think that's kind of just a fascinating twist on like the fear of what AI is going to do. It's like, oh, it's going to take over the world, and we're going to have, these machines that like destroy us. Maybe, maybe not. But in the meantime, I think it really has some potential to improve humanity, and that's just one of the things that like I thought was interesting, and I think we could learn from. All right, so let's talk about the business model. So like we're seeing tons of products. How much time do I have? I'm good. There's tons of products popping up every single day. There were a bunch of people that like were hosts and guests that were sharing about their startups in AI. These are just popular categories of things. The prompting, CRMs, product management, SEO, marketing, obviously images, video, games it's going to be a big part of games. Databases, writing code, like all these things, all these areas. So as an entrepreneur, the way that I look at it is like, okay, what are the tools that we can build that leverage this stuff to make other products and services in these popular categories where we have big companies, right? That's how I look at it when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next or what company I'm going to invest in next. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I was telling this to you earlier, is that I think it levels the playing field and will create more entrepreneurs. So like one of the problems that I've observed with entrepreneurs that come to me, I talk to entrepreneurs all the time, and they are doing some other thing, like they're a professional at X, and they're like, I really don't want to do that anymore. I want to start a company, and I'm really passionate about Y, this thing, right? But they have no idea how to do that thing. A lot of times it's like some engineering, some software product, and they're like, I need to find an engineer, I need to find a co-founder, CTO, right? It's like the most common thing you'll hear at like a founder meetup, right? Looking for a CTO, right? So it's very hard for a lot of entrepreneurs to step out and sort of try something new. And I think what's happening is going to happen is these tools are going to basically level the playing field and allow more entrepreneurs to actually start companies because the tech will be more accessible. The tools will be more accessible. Like they can actually do things that they couldn't do before, right? Without having to spend so much money to get the talent to do it. And I think that's really interesting, right? Because there are so many people that are entrepreneurial at heart, but don't actually step out into that zone because like they don't have the skill, right? And if this sort of wave, this transformation that AI is giving us, gives people the skill and the confidence to actually step out and try and build things, we're gonna have exponentially more entrepreneurs out there, which is cool, which I think is great, and I love that. And I think that's a really important part of what's happening. So I'm gonna give 3 examples of like categories of what's happening in the space of building companies. So you have what I would call the hobbyist, right? So like I'm a hobbyist. I'm a hobbyist and a generalist. Like I'm not an expert at anything. I'm very good at a lot of things, like just very good, right? Which is great for startups because I can do marketing, I can do biz dev, I can do sales, I can do little product, I can do ops, I can do finance, right? So that's good when you're starting a company. Hobbyists are people not necessarily starting companies, but that have a passion about something, like music in my case. I love music, I would love to make music. I don't know how to play an instrument, I don't know how to read notes, I don't know how to compose on a DAW, like I don't know any of that stuff. But I could potentially become a professional with AI tools that fill that gap for me, right? So I think what we're gonna see is a lot of people that are hobbyists become professionals. Whether you start a company or not, you could become a professional. Like I think I could orchestrate a great EDM song if I had an AI that I could just talk to and be like, okay, I like that part, put it over there. I like that part, put it right there. Okay, bring that part up, bring that part down, right? I think I could make a song. But do I know how to use the tools to actually do it right now? No. Do I want to put in the time to learn it? No. But if I had something that could help me do it, I would. Another big area is with developers. So there's so many engineers, and some are better than others. I think the tools that are coming out for engineering is also leveling the playing field, so a lot of people can do a lot more. So for example, if you're a front-end dev, how many people are engineers or do like tech dev? Okay. So most engineers are somewhat specialized, right? There's full stack engineers, of course, but like usually a full stack engineer is better at one thing than the other. There are those that are just like amazing at everything, but they're rare. And so if you're a front-end engineer and you need to build a database and an API to connect to your front-end React site, you have to go find someone to do that, right? So now, if you have the ability to do the full stack and focus on the thing that you like to do the best, and you can have AI do the other pieces to it, that opens up a lot of doors for you to build a lot more stuff, right? Whether it's for your company or a job that you're in, right? So I think that's gonna level the playing field in that area. And then you have creators. I know I saw a few people raise their hand where they're like, I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my job, right? And I think the creator is a big category where there's a lot of fear, right? So like I'm a graphic designer, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, I'm a marketer, all these things that we're seeing all these tools be able to take over. So what do you do? And I think the way to think about it is like, how do I evolve my profession, right? If I'm a graphic designer and I can get paid and spend 3 hours to build a graphic for an ad, or I can just do it in 30 seconds on Midjourney, I am gonna lose my job. So what can I do? How do I transform? How do I leverage the tools to make myself more relevant and more useful to an employer, right? And I think that's the way I'd start thinking about it if you're in one of these categories, is how do I leverage this to transform and enhance and explore more things? All right, I think I'm almost done. Oh, that is my last slide. Okay, so anyway, that's my presentation. Hopefully interesting. That's me. There's some images that I created that I really like. Pretty cool, looks like me. It took me like 45 minutes to get to that because I had to try a bunch of different stuff and style. But anyway, that's it. Thanks for letting me share. That's not gonna stay.
All right, what amazing. Next up is Evan Coopersmith. Let's give it up for Evan.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Evan, EVP of Data Science at AE Studio. I've played around in a bunch of fields like finance and agriculture and hydrology and now large language models and whatnot. And I wanted to entitle this presentation Chatbots, Human Agency, and the Dangling Conversation. And for everybody in the audience who isn't a colleague of mine, I am overly obsessed with writing parodies of things, so I tend to drizzle that into presentations. And we talk of things that matter with rules we must embed. Can an LLM be conscious? Can it see inside my head? For those of you who don't know, that's a parody of Paul Simon's Dangling Conversation, which seemed oddly fitting. So, I work for AE Studio, and our entire reason for being is to increase human agency with technology. I use the quote from Anchorman, it's kind of a big deal. But for us, we're always thinking about how for our developers, for our clients, for humanity in general, how do we make us the best, most intentional, most focused, most productive, best versions of ourselves? How do we use technology to help us do the things we want to do and avoid doing the things we don't want to do? And LLMs have an incredible amount of potential to increase human agency on this axis. And they have a little bit of a potential to impede that agency if they're used incorrectly. So I figured we would talk a little bit about that. So large language models, or how I learned to stop Googling and love ChatGPT. So we've got the power of LLMs, the failures, their vulnerabilities, we've got the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll talk a little bit about the future of LLMs, and I wish I'd come up with a movie reference that had 4 categories, but I didn't think that hard about it. And just because I said I loved parodies, come tech leads and managers, please heed the call, accept your employees will soon be enthralled, for answers arrive and its reach now has sprawled, the old tools are rapidly aging. Bob Dylan wrote that song, The Times They Are Changing, 60 years ago, and what he was really, I think, getting at was that certain changes are inevitable, and there's not much for the old generation to do other than get out of the new road if they can't lend a hand. So this is going to change the way everybody works and thinks and operates, and that part's inevitable. The only question is how we're going to respond to it. And there's an enormous amount of potential here. So this might be a little bit small. I don't know if anybody can read this. I asked ChatGPT, can you proofread this sentence? I don't use commas so good, and my mom got mad at me when I said, let's eat grandma. And ChatGPT handled this spectacularly well. First, it told me that I shouldn't say I don't use commas so good. I should say I don't use commas very well. My English teacher from elementary school would be very proud. And then it said that we should make sure to add a comma so that grandma doesn't think the evening's going to end in some horrible manner for her. Let's eat, comma, grandma, not let's eat grandma. And then it gives us this elegant description of why exactly I was in error. That's great. And editing is a laborious and cumbersome process, and anybody who writes should be very happy that something like this exists. I also did the same sort of thing with code, and I said, can you tell me what's wrong with this Python script? I asked it to try to print hello world. I forgot a quotation mark, and it gave me the proper code, and it told me how I'd screwed up. And for somebody who has to debug code for a living, which is probably quite a number of people in this room, that's fantastic. That's a time-consuming process, and an algorithm helped. And I even asked it at the bottom, can you give me a pithy quote or a movie reference to use the bottom of a slide in a presentation about the uses of ChatGPT? And it did. It said, making the impossible possible and the possible easy, and then it gave me a great movie reference. It said, with great language models comes great responsibility. So apparently large language models have seen Spider-Man like everybody else. That's wonderful. We can debate the extent to which it isn't creativity because it didn't write Spider-Man, but it's pretty spectacular. But there are some downsides. These are just transformers predicting the next token, right? You'd have an algorithm that can sort of build a mathematical distribution of what might come next. Some of our presenters are going to go into a little more detail there and have explained that. And so you can ask it questions where it gives spectacularly wrong answers, and I used a sort of interesting mathematical example. I asked it to divide a very large number by a smaller number. And at first, it's brilliant. It says, well, that first large number is 2 to the 30th power, and that second large number is 2 to the 10th power. And I know how the rules of exponents work. If you divide 2 to the 30th by 2 to the 10th, you get 2 to the 20th. Great, sign this thing up to be the SAT tutor for my little cousin when it needs it. With one small problem. It didn't solve the math problem, or even make any attempt to solve the math problem, or even think anything at all about math. What did it do? Essentially what it did is it said, I wonder if I can find a textbook that has asked that question before, and then I can just find the answer from that textbook. Well, can you imagine trying to solve a math problem by trying to find where somebody else had asked the same math problem before? There'd be some pretty significant limitations. And the reason you know this is a problem that somebody's asked before is that if you ask how many bytes are in a gigabyte, that's the number. If you ask how many bytes are in a kilobyte, it's that number. And if you divide them, you get the number of bytes in a megabyte. I'll bet you that's all over the internet somewhere. And then I said, divide that really big number, instead of by 1024, by 1023. I am confident nobody in this room can do that problem in their head. I am also confident that everybody in this room knows that you will get a different answer if you divide the big number by 1023 than if you divide it by 1024. Everybody in the room knows that, except the ChatGPT very confidently walks through the process of long division and gets to the same answer. Okay, so this is the colleague that not only gets it wrong, but has no ability to say that they don't know how to do something or need help. Show of hands, who wants to hire that person? So there are some limitations here, and it's important to understand why that is. What was it doing? Well, it looked at the string and said, find me strings on the internet that are pretty similar to this and tell me what should come next. Great. Oops. And I think we can get into a little bit of the technical detail. These large language models are zero-shot learners. The canonical example of a zero-shot learner is, imagine that you had a child and you told the child who'd seen a bunch of horses, by the way, a zebra looks exactly like a horse, it just has black and white stripes, and the child would go, oh yeah, I've got it. Large language models can't update those facts. They have no mechanism of doing it. They have all of that corpus of information, and even if you tell it something, it can't learn from it in real time. So you ask it a question, it gives you an answer, you ask it another question, and it just takes that whole big lump of tokens and runs the model again, which is not how conversations happen with human beings where we give new information. So we've got some structural challenges. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities and some of the things we're thinking about with those vulnerabilities at AE. So large language models learned everything they know by reading the internet, which is kind of like a lot of us, except the problem is we apply some critical thinking when we read the internet, and large language models don't know how to do that. So you're trusting the wisdom of the crowd, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. And also, we wrote an award-winning paper at a conference that noted, by the way, you can really manipulate these models into delivering information that you might not want them to. Large language model misbehavior can be legitimately dangerous if you build an app and the secret sauce is large language models, and then it reveals sensitive information, or it reveals its inner workings, or it says something that is, as we've seen on the internet a bunch of times, inappropriate or inapt. And it used to be that at least the bad actors in the world had to be sophisticated. You needed to write a worm, not like the gummy worms, but actual worms, or you needed to write a Trojan horse and it wasn't made out of wood, but whatever. Or you had to write some SQL injection. Now you don't need to be sophisticated, you just need to be ill-intentioned and then go through the artificial social engineering process, and you can get to some pretty interesting results. And I just figured I would use a little bit of a Busta Rhymes quote. Quick quote, how many people listened to Busta Rhymes in the 90s? I'm just checking generation. Okay, we're all right here. So I wrote, this is serious, scripts become deleterious, outcomes are a bit mysterious because misplacing trust is dangerous. I don't think Busta Rhymes was talking about large language models 25 years hence, but I can't be sure. So where does this head? Well, there's a few paths forward. One of them is the dystopia that Neo experienced in The Matrix, and that might look like doom scrolls of perfectly addictive content and misaligned AIs that turn us all into paperclips, and a deepfake hologram of all of you that says exactly the opposite of your views about everything in the world. Probably not going that way. There's also the puppy dogs and rainbows utopia, where the LLM is a better technical co-founder than anybody in this room, and you just tell it to write me the next business plan for the next great unicorn, and then write the code for its MVP and make sure to design a landing page with a perfect UI UX, and we all can go home and be very, very economically productive. Probably not that either. So what's real life going to look like? I suspect we're still going to have to ask it better questions to get better answers. I suspect we're going to be able to write anodyne corporate emails a whole lot faster than we could before, which is great. I think the internet will still be wrong sometimes. Sorry. And the real magic here is that just like the Industrial Revolution changed dramatically what one human being was capable of, and all of the economic gains that came from that are evidenced in this room, we're all to some extent knowledge workers who don't have to sell the brawn in our backs to make a small amount of money. This might be something similar. So, wit in large doses and code deftly written, parodied lyrics with which I am smitten. My favorite things are thinking a little bit about the future and being optimistic about it. And at AE, we think long-term about absolutely everything. So I'll sort of wrap this up when I talk about the future of human thought, peace, love, and faster software development. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Remember and try to think about what you think about human values from 1,000 years ago. You probably don't have a very good view of child sacrifices and all of the abhorrent views of race, gender, religion, and pretty much everything we thought about the world and each other 1,000 years ago. What do you think about transportation 100 years ago? You know, horses and buggies or cars on roads that weren't paved and no interstate highways. What do you think about your smartphone technology from 10 years ago? What do you think about LLMs from a year ago? Were you even thinking about LLMs at all a year ago? So then ask yourself the following question. What might people be saying about this moment in time in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years? And then recognize that the pace of progress is a whole heck of a lot faster for the next 1, 10, 100, and 1,000 than the pace that preceded it. So this is a pretty interesting moment in history to be building technology. I don't think we all can quite get our heads around what that might entail, but I'm kind of excited to think about what the people in this room might build. And so I ended a quote that parodies one of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe poems. It was many and many a job ago at a startup by the sea, when I first would try an OpenAI by the name of GPT-3, and her beauty bespoke with every keystroke of her scintillant NLP. For those of you who actually know the real poem, it's Annabelle Lee, and it doesn't end so well for the protagonist, Annabelle Lee. It goes really horribly wrong. But I'm a lot more optimistic about that because usually the alarmists and the Malthusians tend to be proved wrong by history, and I think they will be here too. And I just wanted you to think about those time frames as you leave and think about what you're going to build next. Thanks so much.
Oh my God, give it up again for Evan. Oh, last but definitely not least, and before we get into the Q&A panel, is Sarah Cooper, head of research at Cohere for AI. Let's give it up for Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. It's not quite Cooper, it's Sarah Hooker, but really delighted to chat to you all today. I'll be talking about open challenges and opportunities. To be honest, when Todd invited me to come chat, I wasn't quite sure what people would be interested in, so I thought maybe I would zoom out, because I think we're at a moment where, for me as a researcher, it's really exciting because people know what I do. So I was at Google Brain. I now run a research lab that is large language model technology. And I lead Cohere for AI, so a research lab that works on fundamental natural language processing research. And we do open source code and open source models, but I wasn't quite sure what people would be interested in part because we're in a very exciting time for large language models. So this is actually a model that we're prototyping with our researchers so we can text it. And I was asking, I'm giving a talk tonight, and you can see like just the sheer excitement of seeing such great exchange in natural language is something that wasn't even possible a few years ago. I even said, what is the best large language model currently available? And it answered the right way. So go explore Cohere. It's not just OpenAI out there. And while this is all very exciting, I thought rather than focusing on this moment, which I think is what brought you all to this room, it might be interesting to zoom out and talk about how we got here. So what led to this? Because in some ways it started a while ago. So I'm sorry for how bad the font size. I think the styling got a bit, toyed with when it was pulled over from the other slides, but I think it's still legible, so we'll make it through. But I want to introduce you to Joseph. So Joseph made one of the earliest chatbots that was quite the news header back in the day. It was called Eliza, after Eliza Doolittle. And Eliza was based on a popular form of therapy, which is called Rogerian therapy. And it's very convincingly repeated back to you what you said. And it involved statements like this. So I put the same prompt or question that I put into our Cohere text model. And I said, I'm giving a research talk tonight about large language models. And the response is very confusing. It kind of puts it back to you as a question. And then I say yes, and it says, I see, let's explore that a bit more. So this is a trademark of this type of model. It will typically say, please go on, or let's explore more. But what's fascinating is that this was still very convincing. So nonetheless, many users of Eliza were convinced of the intelligence. In fact, Joseph had a slightly breakdown in relations with his secretary because he found his secretary using it to ask questions about her relationship with her boyfriend. And he actually went on to write a whole book about how we shouldn't anthropomorphize these models, and we shouldn't kind of give it the credibility of humanity that it doesn't have. But what's fascinating is that Eliza is nowhere near the models that we have today. So Eliza is what is called a rule-based model. It only could give or operate according to a set of rules. What we have today and what you've seen in all these presentations is way more dynamic. It's way more interesting. So what separates, oh, and just like that, the formatting's back. This is going to be a wild ride. So what separates Eliza from our current chatbots? And in some ways, this is an interesting question because it's really what allows for research breakthroughs. So I'm going to talk about 3 dates. So one was 1964, when Eliza was released from Joseph at MIT. I'm also going to talk about 2012 and 2017. For most of computer science history, there were two different visions of how to make progress. There was the Eliza vision. So this was rule-based expert systems where you codified the rules of how algorithms would operate. This was the first algorithms that played chess as well. They were all you can only operate according to these moves. And if you see a move, you can only respond in certain ways. There was also deep neural network approaches. This is a perceptron. It was released in 1957. And it's where the model learns the rules. So you don't preset rules, so you don't predefine. This is fun. I see people nodding. Okay, exciting, yes. And what's interesting about these two camps is that they hated each other. So these were called the connectionists, and these were called the symbolists. And for most of computer science history, they just didn't get along. In fact, the connectionists were largely ostracized. They didn't have funding. They mainly moved to Canada, because Canada was the only people that would fund them. And rule-based systems dominated. And what's interesting about this is that the way that they dominate is that neural networks weren't shown to be successful. There was no proof that they could be successful. So these are the three researchers who recently won the Turing. You may recognize them. It's Jan LeCun, who's at Meta now, runs Meta Research. Jeffrey Hinton, who was at Google Brain when I was there, has recently retired, and also Joshua. This is fun because they talk about how ostracized they were. Essentially, this is all the rejections that they got for their papers on deep neural networks over the years. And it was rejections that were almost like, why are you working on this? This is terrible. CVPR reviewer rejects Jan LeCun's paper even though it beats the state of art. The reviewer says because it tells us nothing about computer vision because everything is learned. So what's interesting is that this continued through 2012. And in 2012, basically, until then, everyone abandoned funding. So what was interesting at Google Brain while I was there is that most of my directors were all Canadian because that's the only country that preserved funding. So all the experts in deep neural networks ended up in Canada, in Toronto and in Quebec. But in 2012, what happened was that AlexNet for computer vision was introduced. And overnight, everyone switched to convolutional neural networks because it beat everything else out of the water. It was overnight. There's very few moments in scientific progress where overnight you see a flip. This breakthrough was in part due to a lucky fluke. So while those three gentlemen that I showed, they kind of proposed the algorithm changes, it was the combination of the algorithm with the hardware. So GPUs, which were created and developed for video games, were repurposed in a very unexpected way. In fact, this was one of the most bizarre kind of coincidences where you had this match of an algorithm with a hardware that it wasn't intended for at all. And this is what allowed for the empirical evidence. And so this is interesting because it's almost this perseverance over decades by kind of this rogue group of researchers. But it's equally interesting to talk about what happened between 2012 and 2017. So in 2017, while I was at Brain, there was this paper, Attention is All You Need. Aiden is currently my boss, so he was at the University of Toronto at the time. All of the people in this paper have gone on to do various different large language model startups. And basically, after this paper was released, an enormous amount of funding was thrown at all of them. Why? Why did this happen? Because this paper was transformative in the same way that a lot of that early perceptron connectionist history was. This paper proposed a very unique, radically different type of architecture called the transformer. A transformer were a breakthrough because they changed how we could process sentences. So before this, what we had was LSTMs. If you have not had to grapple with an LSTM, good for you. But recurrent neural networks, or LSTMs, they could only grab a certain context window. So they only could grab part of the sentence. The revolution with transformers is that they had this way to pay attention to the entire sentence. So it was another stepwise change in performance. And this is kind of 2017 where we see this big breakthrough. And this is the building block of all the current models. So every single model, whether it's Command from Cohere for GPT, they're all built on Transformer. I want to really wrap up because I want us to get into the panel because that's always the most fun part of these things. But I want to just talk briefly about the Great Acceleration. So what has led to what we see now? Because I think many of you maybe are excited by what you see now. So there's a few ingredients that led to the jump between that first building block of the transformer and the breakthrough that you're seeing in terms of chatbots and in terms of just the quality of text and engagement that you're seeing. One is this bigger is better. So I think earlier someone mentioned 6 billion as a limit, but in fact we're kind of at 182 billion weights for many of these models. And it turns out bigger is better. And so many of the race has been in terms of the size of the model. This is both for vision and NLP, and it's because certain properties emerge at scale. So certain attributes that a model has don't show at smaller scales and only emerge at much larger scales. Things like performing well at math problems or being able to write code. A lot of those things, like generating a chart that was showed earlier in the first talk, those emerge once your model hits a certain size. There's also been changes in how we optimize this model. So we followed a very simple recipe for a long time where you do this unsupervised pre-training of a massive model, and then you train a model for a single task. So I might train a model for sentence classification, then I'll train another model for generation. This is an interesting radical shift where recently, 2 years ago, there was this change towards, can we train for multiple tasks at once? And why is this interesting or pivotal? Why is this a big moment? It's because we move towards a global model paradigm where instead of having many specialized models for different tasks, you can just train a single large language model, and it does the zero-shot performance that you can see, where you can switch up and ask it to act like a drunk friend, and then next thing you know, you're asking it to generate charts. So that's a single model that's behind all those requests, and that's what's radical about it from a scientific perspective. And what makes it really a kind of a huge leap in what we could do before. And that's because we can kind of transition from these task-specific models to something more abstract. I would also say the big change has been all my colleagues care about data again. After ignoring it for years, everyone's obsessed with data, and it's because the quality of data that we collect for these models has shown to be pivotal for the performance. So it's really interesting. And what I mean by that, human feedback. So your preferences about what you like, it's going to come more and more into account. And we're going to eventually end up with models that are fine-tuned to what you prefer. I'm actually going to scooch over the next part because I kind of want us to get to the panel, but it's been a roller coaster ride. It's been fun. There are some open questions that I think are really interesting. I'm sure we're actually going to get to them in the panel, so I actually might stop there and then we can dive in because I know we have an amazing moderator who's coming up, and I can get to these there. But there are plenty of open questions, and I'm happy to talk about them more. But thank you, everyone, so much.
Sorry. All right, let's give it up again for Sarah Hooker. All right, so this is the fun part where we go into a panel discussion. So if you guys can help me move the chairs back up, please. And we're gonna have Shira Lazar as Zara.
It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Shira Lazar. Hey, how's everyone doing? How amazing was that? I am blown away. Wow, the brilliance on stage. So just for some context, I know some of you. Who do I know here? Can you yell or put your hand up? I know a few people. Yeah, some old friends. I've been in the digital content space for almost 2 decades in LA with a company I started called What's Trending. We were one of the first to cover digital culture in the social media water cooler. You could say in many ways I'm a content creator and a digital media entrepreneur. I got into Web3 over the past year or 2 years or so. So have been into the NFT space as well. I got to check out your stuff, by the way, also. But I think it's really interesting because, you know, the past year, NFTs and Web3 have been the big fad. Would you say AI is not a fad? AI is more here to stay than possibly the NFT space. Is that right? I don't know. I'm still a big fan, but yeah, I'm into the blockchain, you know.
I think a controversial thing I like to say on LinkedIn is that I think Web3 is AI, not blockchain, because the web is full stack. It's got storage, it's got logic, and then it's got presentation. And blockchain is, I think, is a really interesting and novel approach to certain storage problems, but they're sort of finite, and I think they're still finding their way. And so I think AI has that full stack. You have the data, and then you have the input-output layer, and then you've got a bunch of logic, which is historically with software, we program that around rules. We write those rules. And in AI, now AI looks at the input-output and it looks at the storage, and it comes up with the rules sort of on itself, and figures that out sort of probabilistically. So I might be in the minority there around Web3 versus AI, but having dabbled in both, I think AI certainly has a lot more tendrils into the primitives of web-based technology. Certainly because it's been going on a lot longer. As Sarah said, we're just here at this moment in a 70-year journey, and blockchain started out of the recession. So.
Yeah, with Sarah, I was just amazed at how, and thank you for sharing that history, by the way. That was so cool. So if we're just jumping in now, are we late? Oh, we need, and by the way, if you have any questions, you can go over to Todd, and we're gonna line up like at South by Southwest style, like just line up for questions if you have any questions right now, and we'll go to you in a moment.
The whole idea of large language models is so many open problems that still have to be solved. And in some ways, it's a technology which is transformative in the sense that there's so many downstream use cases. What I mean by that is that we already talked about some of the problems that maybe still exist, like factuality. Like if I trained a large language model a year and a half ago and asked it now about Queen Elizabeth, the model might not be able to respond accurately that Queen Elizabeth has passed. There's things like that where there's still massive, interesting, open research questions about how we train these models to be up to date, how we train them to not hallucinate, but also from just a downstream user perspective, just the creativity. Because remember, as a researcher, we think a lot about the algorithm, but what's remarkable and what we were talking about earlier is that so much of it's also about how do you create a technology that's accessible and that people can engage with in a way that they connect to it. And so for a long time, researchers have been very obsessed with what's the best algorithm. But I actually think the underexplored space is how do you create tools that people truly connect with? And that's where, as researchers, we're less good, right? Like we need the help of people who are creative to understand how to create something very compelling. Yeah.
That's what excites me because I am not a techie like Jeff. I was listening to you and I was like, that's like me. But you probably can develop stuff more than me where I have a lot of vision and creativity, but it's like, how do we actually create that? And connecting those two. And I feel like the future world where the creatives and the technologists can live together is a beautiful world. So Jeff, I would love to know from you, like what use cases are exciting you right now? Like when you're looking at startups, what are you seeing that is going to be the next big thing besides some of the big things we're hearing about in the headlines?
Sure, can use that mic.
Yes.
So this one. Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you're just seeing it pervasive in tools. Like the Notion is a good example of like, hey, how do we take an existing tool that you're doing something and then add the AI stuff into it to make it more powerful and more useful. But I think there's going to be a lot of stuff in video games. And I'm also in Web3. Like to your earlier question, like I actually think AI is going to be really good for Web3. Maybe the term Web3 was not the right one. We got too overzealous with the term, but like the blockchain, crypto, NFTs, like all that stuff is highly functional and highly useful and is not going away. So maybe it's actually perfect to get a little bit of a smoke screen from AI so that we can sort of come back and have that second wave. But I think video games have a lot of potential to take advantage of this tech as well, and like whether it's in generating 3D models of assets that you're starting to see those tools pop up, or obviously content itself. I think those kinds of creative people are going to really do some really interesting things, and I think that's barely scratching the surface right now. That's one of the categories I really like.
Yeah, I would love to hear from each of you in terms of the use cases, categories that you're really looking out for right now.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. It's just this one. It's only this one mic. There's only this guy. So it's either talk really loud or just.
You can talk loud.
Yeah, go into the mic so the live stream can hear it.
That's a good point. So one of the things we're fond of at AE is the idea of a hackathon, and you sit and you write code for 12 or 24 hours, and you try to distill the quintessential essence of some MVP. How long does it take you to get from 0 to 1? So I think your point about this being a generalizable tool really means the application is everything, but the change is what you are expected to be able to do and what you're able to do in a day. How long does it take to get from 0 to 1 with an idea in your head to the first product that has a front end, a back end, and a simple operation. How long did that take a year ago? How long does that take now? How long will that take a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now? If you're in the business of starting companies, the number of ideas you can test per time is going to change exponentially. That's where I think the biggest change probably lies.
Sarah?
I think some of it was captured well. I would say there's like both research questions as well as product questions. On the product side, I just think showing people more intuitive ways to interact with it. So for example, I showed me texting to get a response. I think that's cool. I think we should have more interfaces which to engage. I think the idea, you mentioned Notion showing you several templates that you can use. So kind of showing or guiding how people can use models and how they can extract value. The challenges, I think, are going to be stability. So can you get a similar response every time that you ask, or can you always get the task that you want? As well as I think there's a multilingual, interesting research question. So basically everything is focused on English. So all the models that you've seen have been trained to cater to English. Most of the world speaks a different language, and so it's really interesting to understand who will really think through, like how can we adapt these models to work for other domains and to work for other data sets. And I think that's also a really interesting open research question.
What about you, Travis? You sure how like everyone's name, I just met you tonight.
Token white guy is fine. What? Oh, okay, so Sarah mentioned that suddenly everybody cares about data again, which I think is great. I think there's sort of a chicken and egg that happens around algorithms. We get lost around algorithms, but the reason why we get lost around algorithms is because historically we've held the data sets sort of constant. We've had benchmark data sets for a long time that are relatively stale. And anyone who actually builds applications that use AI, where AI is a big component of that user experience or the value that's getting delivered, is always going to say the data set is the thing that matters. Because algorithms get better over time, that's the part that you sort of swap out. And so the proprietary thing is around data. I think that the most interesting part that I'm certainly looking at a lot is the underlying data model has historically just been effectively a spreadsheet in its structure. And that's really great for mimicking back and forth conversations between a human and a computer. But human to human, as Evan said, is fluid, it's organic, and it follows a different structure than any regular relational database. And so I think that we've been looking at a lot is how do we use AI to help us evaluate human-to-human communication, which, by the way, currently is done manually by linguists around the world and manually by user researchers inside of companies. And so you can't do that very effectively at a human level. You can't get an evaluation if you're using anything other than a graph database. And so graph databases, which were cool, the knowledge graph around Google and stuff like that in the early 2000s are suddenly cool again because we're finding that, holy crap, you don't need as much compute for an algorithm if you have a really elegant approach to the data set and the way that data set is organized.
Yeah, and with that, there's a lot of ethical issues around this, depending on how something is built, biases with AI. I mean, how could a company like Microsoft mess this up so much recently with their chatbot? I don't know if you saw the New York Times article about how dark it went and trying to steal this man from, he was married and everything. It got weird. Like, I mean, how do we stop something like this from happening, Sarah?
Oh, I love that I'm in the... yeah. So I think that there's a few pieces, right? So I don't think this is an issue that is solely Microsoft's issue. So this is I think part of it is there's an expectation that is going into interacting with these models that is pretty high versus what I think most people who know how the models are built, there's still a research idea translating into a wider use case, basically overnight. So there's that. I think that in terms of what can tangibly be done is there is a question about how do you release and how do you scale access and how many people are interacting with it. There's also what we can do to essentially align models with human values. So a lot of the actual research in this area is how can we take what we know about human preferences, and every time you're being asked to flag if something's unsafe, in whatever chatbot interface you're using, that's being used to essentially do optimization. It's used to do reinforcement learning, human-aligned guided optimization. And what that does is it constrains the model so it doesn't repeat those type of instances. But that is not an overnight Band-Aid, and I think one of the things that we have to grapple with as a community is what are the expectations people have when they go into these engagements, as well as this is a model which is being trained on the internet. And when you realize that, you kind of understand how you can quickly probe the model into doing, frankly, kind of behavior which is not really acceptable, because if you are training on the internet kind of reflects us as a humanity. And so what we're really asking is to constrain the model to be what we hope to be as humanity, but it doesn't incorporate all the training data that's out there. So I think as a researcher, I actually am thinking a lot about this in terms of how do we accelerate some of those research flows that are really thinking about the safety and mitigation of some of this harm and the generation of toxicity in particular. As a user, I think my main concern is that people are going in with really high expectations right now. And in some ways, this is a research idea which turned overnight into something that millions of people use. And so there is a misbalance there.
Yeah, so is there a model beyond the LLMs? If this is what we're taking from the internet, is there a model beyond that? Or, could AI save humanity and make us better so it's taking better information for us? I'll go to you, Jeff, and then I can
me?
you, Evan.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of talked about that a little bit.
That's what I
And
was
yeah,
saying,
and I mean, I hope so. Like, I teach a high school entrepreneurship class. I've been teaching for 8 years. And like the first question that I ask my students is, we talk a lot about, AI and that whole idea of living in a simulation, and sort of the class is almost always split. These are seniors and juniors, and half of them are terrified. Like literally they're young, right? You'd think they'd all be like excited about the future, but half of them are like, I don't like it. I can't imagine this being a simulation. Like reality has to be understandable. And then half the class is like fascinated by it, And I think that for me, like I've always been someone that's just like really excited about this kind of tech and the idea of having AI that can actually transform humanity. So like I think yes, and maybe it'll take longer, but I just always sort of been optimistic in that regard and pessimistic about how humans have sort of become. So I hope so. I don't know exactly how that'll manifest itself, but I feel like there's a lot we can benefit from.
If it means taking from a new data pool, what could that be, Evan?
Oh, go for it. Yep. There you go.
I don't want to grab it like out of somebody's hand. Yeah, so there's a couple of sort of interesting questions about this, right? Because as Sarah was alluding to it, one of the things that we want to be doing is training algorithms to have sort of human values. But that's a really hard thing to think about, because I was alluding to this in the presentation, that we tend not to look kindly on the values of not that long ago, which creates the problem of, well, how will we look upon the values of humanity today in 5 years, 10 years, 100 years? And I suspect it will be not terribly favorably. And I say that only because we always have looked on values unfavorably before. And so in that regard, I start to think in terms of like, how would you set the priors and the initial templates of a model that very quickly isn't going to be very well constrained by us? And I realize that starts to get into a much deeper and darker question about alignment. But I do think a little bit about sort of what would you need to give it as a template that would cause it, if in case it had some power over us, would want to think kindly upon us? And if it did, it might be inclined to solve a great number of societal problems. And if it wasn't, it might be inclined to turn us into paperclips or some other like horrific dystopian outcome. I don't actually have the answer, but we're just starting to do a little bit of research internally about what it might mean for an AGI to have some of those templates initially. So it's sort of a deep and important question to start thinking about. I didn't mean to jump in front of you there.
Oh, no, I was passing it to you. That's perfect, yeah.
Do you have a thought on this also, Sarah?
No, I think some of it's being reflected. So this question of how do you update it is very important. It's actually a big technical question of how do you update a model over time, continual learning. What you're getting at is that comedy, even from 10 years ago, might not be funny to us anymore. But it is actually a bigger question in the sense that it doesn't just exist for biases, it also just exists for facts. So country names may change. The name of the president may change or should change every 4 years in the United States. And so the things like that, it's actually deeper. It's not just bias. We need our models to be updated in more routine ways. And right now, the only way to update them is essentially you retrain on all the data, including the new data. So one of the questions that as researchers we think about a lot is how can we do that more efficiently? Can we update parts of the model? Can we do it in a more precise way? But maybe, I don't know, it sounds like there's a lot of people with questions. So yeah. Yeah.
I want to hear from everyone. I guess, here, you can take the mic.
All right, we'll go through this quickly. Liam has a question.
Yeah, this question is for Sarah, and I think it's great that we are seeing more competitors to OpenAI in the space and more language models coming out. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about what you think Cohere is focused on, and what is it that you guys are working on that is differentiated from everything, all the other companies like Adept and Anthropic, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think just for others who don't know, Adept and Anthropic also have large language model offerings. So Anthropic has Claude, which I would say that the main difference is Cohere is very product focused and is very interested in how to deliver at scale. So a lot of the use cases are how can we make this available to companies where they can hit API limits that maybe are kind of painful right now for OpenAI. So how do we scale those requests, as well as how do we work on multilingual? So multilingual is really important for us in the sense that we really want to serve the world. And so a lot of our focus is on training robust, both embedding models. So that's used a lot for search, and particularly multilingual search, as well as training now generative models for multilingual. Yeah, but that's a great question. I think it's good that there's so much excitement in this space, because typically when you see a lot of resources used to accelerate ideas that are on the fringe between research and product, you see massive leaps, and it generally accelerates a lot of directions at the same time and a lot of breakthroughs. So I think it's a great thing that we have this rich ecosystem now. Yeah. Yeah, I can go. I mean, shout out to Leon. So this gentleman, Leon, is a super interesting open source, open science, has contributed literally the data set underpinning Stable Diffusion. So, I mean, super fascinating. I will say it's interesting. So search is an interesting one because the way that you search will depend. So often you want a very precise output. Think about when you're searching for a flight. Think about when you have to get from here to home, and that's a type of search where you have to retrieve information. And there's also now this new type of search where we want to engage, we want a conversation, we maybe want something loose form that's more about searching but having a more rich retrieval. It's not clear how these use cases intersect, and it's not clear how you create a product that's comprehensive for both. So I think it's actually a big challenge for a company as established as Google to figure out how to bridge both within its existing product. That's not to say that it won't. I worked at Google. I think there's a lot of really smart people there. I think what's interesting is that for me, the most interesting search space right now for large language models is actually retrieval within private databases. So typically companies have a lot of information that they have to navigate, and often they want to go to someone who can provide a rich way of interacting with that information. And that tends to be much more of an interesting use case as some of these large language models. And so that creates an opportunity for not Google, because Google doesn't really do those type of embeddings. So yeah, it's interesting. And someone else will answer the next one, I think.
I'm Elias. I'm a software developer in finance. And I'm going to try and keep this short. So right now we're talking about large language models. So obviously that's a very specific type of model for a specific type of thing. What are your views on, what happens when you combine an AI that does the mouth tracking plus the deep fakes? Like we've seen examples of these sort of limited AIs that do something that's, you're like, oh, that's kind of crazy, but it's only doing the mouth tracking. It's only doing, the speech generation. And I still think you can combine these things and not have general intelligent AI, but you can have misinformation, you can have propaganda that's way easier to spread, that's way more convincing, phishing attacks. So how much responsibility do you feel as technologists to not only develop good technologies in sort of as ethically good as you can be in today's present moment, and also talk about the dangers of developing these technologies, and making sure that people are aware and know that, like, oh yeah, this might, you saw on the internet, but it might not be real.
Sarah? So we weren't the only human species, but we're the last ones. So you have to think about what happened to the others and who did it to them. So we are what we are, and that's always going to be the case. An interesting thing that I think about a lot is the last Cambrian explosion of information that happened sort of at the magnitude that we're seeing today, which was the invention of the printing press. Printing press was amazing. It finally allowed us to stop losing knowledge faster than we were preserving it. And it led to a diffusion of information. People who had thoughts could sort of make them, and then they could travel far and wide. It also then led to 230 years of continuous war on the European continent alone. And the only reason why we stopped killing each other so much, starting with about 100 years ago, 80 years ago, is because along the way, some of the knowledge that we were sharing with each other was about how to improve life such to a level that we stopped being so grumpy we wanted to kill each other. But we had a hard time for 230 years. And I think that's gonna happen for us. No, it's gonna be awesome, and we won't be around for it. And that's how it works.
Don't you think it's interesting, like even Elon calling out his own company for it was supposed to be open and now it's like pay for play? Like, don't you think people are just gonna decide like I want to use this company because they're ethical and this one because they're not? Like I'm not gonna use this company, or do you think people will call out these things, or you'll create more ways to figure out? Is it up to the social media companies to flag these things somehow, or leave it to people? I don't know.
I mean, talk about new jobs that will be created. Is like, moderating social media as it is right now is a massive undertaking. So maybe there's AI to do that as well with people, but I think they're going to have to build tools to identify exactly what you're talking about, right? Because I agree, it is going to happen, and people are going to use it in a negative way. So I guess it's kind of up to us to grow with the tech, and that's why I go back to that. Like, can we evolve as a species and use something that has that, like your quote, that power to do good or bad? And so, yeah, I'm sure Facebook will spend a ton of money, and Google will spend a ton of money trying to identify. I mean, even Google is trying to figure out how to identify content that was AI generated, so they don't give it as much love in search results, right? That's like a huge problem. You just go on
schools, educators now.
Yeah, that too, right? A lot of students are just using the tool to regurgitate content without having to do any of the work. So it is going to take some effort, but there'll definitely be some ups and downs along the way. I don't know.
Actually, I have a PS to the thing because it was sort of a downer, and I want to end an upper. So Evan said that we're going to be able to iterate through ideas much faster at a scale we were never able to do before. In our generation, we will potentially have an existential threat to the species, and we are not making enough progress on the solutions, period.
That's your hope?
No, and the hope is
went further down.
No. The hope is that this tool can help us iterate through solutions we could not do on our own. And I think that's awesome, is that we get to finally use the printing press to generate a lot of things like medicine and a bunch of other things. All the things that we have today would not have been possible without the printing press. Right, and so, like, the duality of humanity is reflected in the duality of any technology. And I think the choice for us to make, it is ambiguous, there's ambiguity here, but I certainly think that ambiguity is an opportunity, and I think all of us up here and most people in this room would rather tip the scales towards a positive event, which is why we're all having these discussions in the first place.
That was a bit better. We do have a question. I don't know if you have any answers of what you're working on to help this ethics part, but you might not be working on anything. Yeah, after. Why don't we go to a question, then we'll do a PS to that, yeah.
My question will be a take onto this. I'm an AI researcher and cybersecurity founder, and I'm thinking a lot about this stuff, particularly as we approach the 2024 election. This seems like a battleground for both domestic and foreign psyops across the board. And I'm just curious how you guys are thinking about this, right? There's a lot of eyes on US researchers and how these tools will be used by the CCP or the FSB or the CIA. Anybody can get their hands on this and create realities that will disturb the social psyche and the social contract. So, big question, but just curious any thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I think for both of the questions, it resonated with me because I think about it a lot. So there's this question of, part of it is that if you forget even the misuse of the technology, even when it's being used how it's used, there's so many people who feel that it's human-like or it's resonating with them. And in some ways, what makes this technology or this particularly breakthrough powerful is that language is so important to us as humans, and it's so important to how we connect with others, that when we see human language that feels like how we communicate, it feels really powerful to us, and it resonates with us, and it connects with us. And when it's misused, and I think the misuse that you're talking about is when it's used to sway opinions or to populate fake content or misinformation, I do think about this a lot. The technical solutions that we have are evolving real time. So there's things like watermarking. So can we trace what text is generated from a model? It's imperfect. And in fact, students have quickly showed us how imperfect it is by finding ways to avoid the watermarking being detected when they submit their chatbot generated essays. But it is there is enormous amount of resources being placed in that research right now because there's a realization of how important it is. And you said you worked in cybersecurity. So much of how watermarking is being done is by security researchers. So this is the need for more input and for cybersecurity, just both industry researchers as well as academic researchers. It's a huge, huge need and also opportunity because things like how do we watermark, how do we make it cheap to check, and also just how do we incorporate those checks on very popular sites where a lot of media is shared. It's going to be big questions, and I think it's evolving quickly. So that part I'm optimistic about. It kind of gets to what you were saying about, when something new is introduced, we recalibrate. But it is on my mind, and I think it's on my mind in a few different ways, not just the misuse, but also how do we communicate this technology to users and set expectations properly. And that's also equally tricky to navigate.
Todd, are we allowed any other questions, or are we wrapped? Oh, where did we go?
One thing I will add on the watermarking piece, and going back around to me sort of shitting on Web3 earlier, I actually think this is a really great use case for cryptography and blockchain, is that blockchain can offer a very systematic, well understood, empirically agreed upon paradigm for watermarking content in a way that doesn't get in the way of the content, but also is trustless. I think this is honestly probably where the next wave of blockchain probably should go, and is watermarking outputs from these generative models so that we can know what's real and what's not.
All right, we got 3 last questions, and then we're going to go into networking. We'll be here until 10, so I know I said until 9, but we'll actually stay until 10.
to you guys. Credit to you guys for being here as well.
Yeah, LA.
My question is really around kind of like the B2B business models for entrepreneurs with LLMs. So Jeff, maybe you'll have some insight on this. So Navjo is talking about, this is probably applicable to a lot of people in this space, is we're thinking about how do we leverage sales data, Salesforce to make these interactions and questions that someone might have a lot simpler. A lot of the challenges that we think we're going to be running into is around just like to make these sort of solutions, you need the data from, the proprietary data from an actual company. And so there seems to be like this big barrier to entry where not even to launch a business, but to build an MVP for a business, you need to be able to show them, hey, like this is the you know the secret sauce we have, and this is how we can do it, but we need your data to do it. So how do you think about like with large language models and these new business models, like how to you know think about this and how to approach it?
Well, I mean, one thing that tends to happen in B2B scenarios, you know, like it happened with SaaS. You know, when we were building a SaaS company, it was still, there were a lot of companies using like their own servers, and they were just not cool with putting their software that they were going to license from you on a server, and now it's just like standard, right? So that same thing will happen here, where there'll be comfortability around sharing that data so you can build the models. And that concept is not that new, right? There's been lots of companies that have gone to other businesses and said, like, I need your data to do something with to give you an output that you're looking for, right? Whether it's a predictive model or whatever it is, right? So I think it'll become a little bit easier from that standpoint. I think at a higher level, the businesses that are going to pop up sooner than later are the ones that are leveraging the other LLMs that don't need to do that. So to the extent that you can create something for a company that doesn't require them to do anything, is going to obviously get quicker penetration into the market. But I think what you're trying to do is a good one. The one thing that I will say about that particular idea or other ideas like it is like one of the things that I find about using ChatGPT or anything, it's actually some work. Like it's not like just like talking to your friend. Like it takes some effort, and I find myself struggling sometimes to be like, okay, I'm ready. Let me sit down and like do the thing, you know? And like when you're talking to salespeople and that are using, like they suck at that. Like they don't want to do that. And so I think for you and other products like that where you're integrating it to make their life easier, it really has to be easy to access that information so that they can leverage it or they won't adopt. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot of in the B2B products is a lack of adoption. And what you were saying, where it's just like, what are the products that are highly usable? So I would keep that as like a fundamental product development tenet, you know, for any of these companies. Like, how is this thing like so usable? It's just like it becomes turnkey. Like the Notion thing, it's like it's some work to turn that on and start using it. Like I've played with it and I was into it, but like I can see myself not using it a lot just because it's kind of some work.
Hello, I'm echoing all the same things. This is a great event. You guys are great, very informative. Hopefully I don't waste too much time with what might be considered kind of a big question, but I am genuinely curious. You made some great points regarding like the existential risks that we face, and with these models, the bigger and bigger they get, we sort of face more and more philosophical problems because at the end of the day, they are optimizers and not, it seems like they're never going to tell us what's worth doing, but rather how to do it right. So my question is, if it's already better at medicine and it's going to be better at law pretty soon, what's to stop us from just laying down as a world, or maybe we should, because would it not have objective morality, or the closest thing that we could get to it, if we give it all the data we've ever gained with 1 trillion parameters?
Sounds up your alley.
I'll take a shot at that. Should we just lay down and welcome the AI overlords that will be our vast superiors in any number of arenas? Not yet, no. So we'll start there. But think about this for a second. We look at them sort of almost a little bit dismissively because they're optimizers, right? They're predicting the next token. They're simply figuring out the next element in a string of words or numerals or code or whatever else, and we're somewhat dismissive of that. And then cognitive neurologists do research into the nature of the neurons in our brain, and they discover that what we're doing actually is not altogether distinct from predicting the next token in many regards. What we're doing in terms of our own learning is not that different than reinforcement of whether we have or have not predicted the next token. So these models probably will generalize and probably will be enormously competent in ways we don't understand. And I'll even scare you one step further, right, because we're going in this direction. I have a pet bird. I can tell you that the pet bird is 100% certain that he is more intelligent than I am. Why does he think that? Well, all of the forms of cognition with which he is familiar, picking out auditory signs and calls and whatnot, perceiving threats, foraging, finding food, spatial awareness, and various things, in every one of those areas, he is my superior. And in all of the reasons why we think that we are superior to these animals, like the abstract reasoning for language and numerology and whatnot, that bird doesn't even have a template for it. And I bring this up only to say that if the algorithm at one point becomes more intelligent than us, I think it's a little bit hubristic to presume that we'll notice. So, why did I give you that scary little soliloquy? Because I think the answer comes from incentives and thoughtfulness and long-term thinking. So I'm very lucky. I work at AE. AE is a profitable bootstrapped business. So we don't have the financial incentive to push something out tomorrow, even if it's potentially risky. I realize that not everybody is in that situation. I think that's a pretty good start to think a little bit about incentives. I think the second thing you want to think about is that to which you connect these algorithms, right? Right now we're getting a little bit frustrated about a New York Times piece where it's adversarial and combative and angry and it sort of behaves in a manner that's inappropriate. Yeah, but that's sticks and stones. I think the real concern would be the point at which an LLM powers an app and the app powers machinery and the machinery is powerful, or the app powers a number of other apps that interact upon the internet and act and activate information and now can promulgate manipulative information, right? Those are the real concerns. I think the questions we have to start asking are like, what do we connect these things to? When is that a reasonable decision? And what are the incentives of the person doing the connecting? Because I think ultimately it's both good for humanity and good for business to be long-term and thoughtful. I'm not convinced that that's always what's going to occur, but that might be the right place to start. What are you connected to? Thinking about long-term incentives and recognizing your own humility of you're not entirely sure the level of the competence of the intelligent algorithm, because the bird isn't very is certain that it's smarter. And I hope we would all agree that the bird is wrong, although listening to me speak, you could disagree potentially. That's my 2 cents.
All right, I guess I'm the last question here. So in the presentations, it was mentioned that the transformers were kind of discovered as part of the 2017 paper Attention is All You Need. Did you realize at the time that they were going to be so transformative, or did it take some period of time or did it take some time before you could realize like how to productize it? And the second follow-up to that would be, is there any interesting research going on now that you think could be productized over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it was fairly instant. So there was that Europe, which is where that paper was presented. The oral for that paper was given an oral, which means it's one of the most prestigious papers that year. The room was packed. Like, it was fairly, there's few research moments which are at the extremes like that. So most research is like art. So in the short term, you can't really tell if it's good. And most of the time, then you rely on perception. Do other researchers think it's good? But there's some pieces which they're just outliers. And there's almost universal consensus overnight that it's just really important work, and the Transformers paper is one of them. And I think it's really interesting because it also followed in just the amount of funding that followed for everyone who was involved with that project. In terms of interesting research ideas that could be immediately prioritized, so one problem right now that many of you have probably experienced if you played with these tools is, how do you generate larger context? So like, how would you generate a book? This sounds crazy right now, because right now you just have these generations which are little paragraphs, but that's a big technical problem. It involves like how do you have the ability to connect different ideas, and how do you avoid repetition? So one of the issues in models is it just like devolves into repetition. But that's something, if it could be achieved, would be another big wow moment, because it would just expand the world of possibilities. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
We're in Hollywood, and this kind of wraps up the theme. We're in LA, so I feel like some of us might be in entertainment. Like how this could transform entertainment. Similarly, like could we see a whole movie that's coming out of AI, et cetera, or script writing, as you saw the drunken conversation. That was very good.
That feels like making a movie head to toe with the script, the actors, the pixel, like everything, to me seems inevitable. I don't know if it's 3 years out or 10 years out, but like, I just can't imagine at the speed we're going and what you're already seeing that wouldn't be a reality at some point in the near future. Like, and I actually, just to your point, I thought that was a fascinating, your story about these breakthrough moments. Like, I had no idea that had occurred. So I thought that was really interesting. And like, if the speed at which we're moving, like, wouldn't it be probable that those breakthroughs would happen more regularly now? Like, if that happened from that 12 to 17, shouldn't something happen from 17 to 23, 23 to 25, like, that are massive breakthroughs that solve a lot of these things? In particular, I'll leave this and I'll pass it on. Like, that idea of the model is based on all this stuff on the internet. If you asked everybody in this room about the morality question, like, probably most of you are going to be like, believe that human beings should be pretty moral. And like, if you asked all of us to give an opinion about like what a good human being is, we're probably all going to say generally the same thing. Like, there's no people in this room that are probably bad people. But it's what we actually do and say in real life that they're trained on. So like, how do you get the models to actually tap into what we actually believe in our hearts? And that's where they could become intelligent enough to be like, okay, that thing you just said and you want to distribute it on the internet is actually bad. Like, I'm not going to let you do that, right? It could get to that. It feels like it could get to that point. I don't know. I'll take a shot at the values question. I do wonder a little bit about that, because I think most people in this room probably think they are good human beings. I think most people in this room, given the opportunity to assess the morality of the other human beings in this room, would come to a similar conclusion. But then I realize how fast things change, and I think to myself that 200 years from now, somebody might view me as this morally depraved, horrific human being because to celebrate the birth of a nation, I ate this charred piece of mammal flesh on a bun and enjoyed it so richly. Why would I have consumed this mammal with some consciousness of its own just for my own brief little bit of pleasure? I didn't even need it. I wasn't starving, right? Somebody might look at me as morally depraved, just as we look at somebody who's 200 years ago as being morally depraved. So I'm confident in your conclusion, although I'm trying to be humble about our own set of values at the moment. But that does give you a little bit of a sense of why we should be a little thoughtful about locking in current values as we start training these models. At a minimum, we should let them we should let their values evolve as fast as ours are likely to, because to your point, the transformations are way faster now than they ever have been. And that would probably mean that human values and our understanding of ethics and agency and personal autonomy, all of those things are going to change a whole lot faster than we can imagine too. So.
Give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. We appreciate your patience. I know people want to keep connecting and meeting each other. Please, thanks for everyone for watching. We have some final words from our partners and sponsors here.
Yes, thank you so much. And one more round of applause for our speakers and our moderators. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you to PayPal for hosting us, to UAE for sponsoring our food and drink. Todd, are you still around here? Where's Todd? Todd?
He doesn't hear you.
There he is. Come up here, Todd.
Go, Todd. Well, while Todd comes up, are you sharing? I was just going to say, I hope this gave you hope that there's a lot out there and a lot of gaps to be filled. And this is a great way to start by networking events like these and starting to check out some of the platforms that they brought up tonight.
That's fantastic. Everyone's doing an amazing step by coming here tonight. I wanted to thank Todd, founder of AI.LA, Thank you so much for all this.
Thanks, Todd.
It was actually his birthday last Thursday, and so we have something for him. And what you get, what you get the founder of AI.LA is an AI-generated cake. So this is Travis Hughes.
Happy birthday.
Jeffrey, I wish we had this conversation earlier.
That's amazing. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Todd. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Good job.
Talk to each other. Come with your speakers. Thanks a lot.
Photo.
I always